When Ohio State won the national championship a couple of weeks ago, it kind of put the NIL conversation even more to the forefront. It's already been at the forefront of college football over the last couple of years, but all of the talk was, hey, man, they should have won that game. They had a $20 million roster, right? That's Paul Feinbaum was saying that. A lot of people were saying that. Oh, what's the big deal? They paid for this really great squad that had all sorts of players. And when they got top-level running backs in the portal, Caleb Downs, one of the best defensive players in the portal. So, is Georgia doing enough in the transfer portal? Are they doing enough in the NIL game? The numbers say yes. Georgia is among the top 5 or 6 teams in spending. Georgia is among one of the teams with the biggest budget. It's got some of the bigger NIL collectives. They got the one downtown and the Classic C Collective. There's all sorts of collectives. And so, you know, I was talking, and I was with Dean last night. We were talking a little bit, and we're talking about Georgia basketball and how I said, hey, look, in this day and age, it's time for Georgia basketball to dig into the pocketbook a little bit more. But is Georgia doing this right? Is Kirby doing this right? Pete Nakos, there was a report from On3. If you're not familiar with that, it's a site. He said Georgia got some guys for a steal. Kirby really leaned into some old school stuff in getting guys to come at a discount. What do I know about Kirby and the spending? I know that Georgia is definitely a little bit more hesitant to just hand out giant bags of money to these guys. For lack of a better term, they are, they're not just going to be like, hey, Carson Beck, here's your $4 million. That's not happening at Georgia. It's not. All right? I think it's part of why Dylan Raiola, there's a lot of reasons why Dylan Raiola flipped from Nebraska to Georgia. I would think that money has something to do with it. There's plenty of recruitments where money is involved. And I think that Georgia does spend money. There's a little bit of a misconception out there that the Dogs don't spend as much money as some of the other schools. They've got a top 5 budget. And when you're potentially, and what has been over the last few years, the top program in college football, when you add it all together and you add the championships, the draft, the pedigree, the postseason success, Georgia's been the best program in college football in the 2020s, in this half decade that we're heading towards. The thing is, we saw last year, Georgia's team struggled. Is that because they didn't have the right guys? Is that because they didn't go out and spend money on Quinshon Judkins and Caleb Downs? Or, obviously quarterback was a point of contention. They didn't go out and get a Cam Ward. That's a bad example, obviously, but he, is going to be a top 3 pick in this upcoming draft. Is Georgia doing enough? Apparently, Kirby is the thriftiest spender. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post here discussing the money. We're talking about the money. Everything comes down to the money at the end of the day, and that college football is no exception for that, right? You see with the TV deals, you see with NIL, you see with these coaches and these players, money is as big of a deal as it has ever been in our sport. And whether you like that or not, that's just what things are right now. I question certain decisions by some of these players. I question, what happened behind the scenes because, I only know so much. What were those conversations like with the Damon Wilson? Like, what was that like? How much more money is Missouri offering Damon Wilson to leave Georgia? Like, seriously, to me, that's kind of mind-blowing. That's a particular instance, right, where it's like, hey, Georgia, should you have not been nifty here? Should you have allocated a little bit more? Or is, whatever, if it was $1 million or extra, is that just too steep? Something that has made Georgia a little bit different in this day and age of college football, and obviously as the portal becomes more and more of a prominent thing and people continue to leave, they've had to dip into the portal more. And I know that Kirby doesn't want to do that, right? These coaches some of these coaches don't love the transfer portal. What Kirby would prefer is to build from the ground up with these recruits. He wants to build from freshman year, and I get it. I think that there are plenty of benefits to that. In the day and age with the portal, you gotta go hit the portal sometimes now, and they did that. And I'll talk about some of the acquisitions from this season, but are they being too nifty with the money, like Pete Nakos of On 3 was saying about Kirby, when they lose out on a guy like Damon Wilson in the transfer portal, when they lose some of their depth? Georgia sometimes says, hey, you got to go, right? Like it's just we don't have a spot for you or this. But there are instances like that where it's like, okay, well, I don't think that's the case there. Does Georgia need to dip into the pocketbooks a little bit more? It looks like, off of all of the numbers that I can find, that there's a few teams that spent more money. I think Texas, Ohio State, maybe LSU, right? I've seen different charts and I've seen different numbers, but Georgia certainly wasn't first. And look, I don't think you have to be first in spending to win a national championship. I don't think that's like a benchmark that you have to reach. But it kind of happened for Ohio State this past season. And the misconception with the Buckeyes was that, hey, look, they bought this $20 million roster. A lot of it was to retain their players, right? They did bring in a handful of key transfers, and off the top of my head, the quarterback, Will Howard, the center, Seth McLaughlin, the safety, Caleb Downs, and the running back, Quinshon Judkins. So 4 major transfer pieces. And they went out and they handed those guys the money that they needed to hand them to go and play on Ohio State and compete for a national championship. Georgia didn't really get anyone impactful in the portal. And they didn't dip into the pocketbook last season. This season, they turn around, they go after Zachariah Branch, the number 1 transfer receiver, former number 1 receiver in the high school recruiting class, the 2023 class. He was a consensus 5-star. They go out and they get a 6'6" wide receiver in Noah Thomas that had some success in the conference last season at Texas A&M. So they're trying. They're doing more. They got a couple of receivers in the class before that, got a receiver in the class before that. This time, the receivers were bigger names, and I think that they're going to be guys that are relied upon pretty heavily in this offense. But apparently, he's been doing it in a nifty way and not having to spend too much money. So going back to my original question, do they need to spend more money and just get superstars, right? Like, do they need to go and, I don't want to say poach, but when a huge name like Caleb Downs is in the portal, do you just have to give them the bag? Like, is that what we're heading to? If Caleb Downs, let's say he commanded 3, let's say he entered the transfer portal again today and Georgia's on his list, Ohio State's on his list. Let's say that was happening right now. And, Downs is coming here. You're not sure how it's going to happen, but he's feeling it out. Ohio State offers him more money. He wanted to go to Ohio State. These are young kids. I know that some of this audience is older and some of this audience doesn't really jive with what's going on in college football. I talk to my dad and he doesn't jive with it a lot. And I don't either. I don't like some of what's going on, but I'm not one to get in the way of someone paying their money. But for, if Downs is in the portal and the price tag's $3 million, Georgia, you got to offer that to him, right? You've got the funds. Do you want to win national championships? That's going to get you the more funds. That's kind of my take on it. And they can't do that with every single player. But I think with some stars, you just got to bite the bullet and say, hey, man, we got to get you over here. Now, that can cause a rift in the locker room. I don't think that was ever a thing with Carson Beck necessarily, but I see how the Georgia staff might think that. But Carson's another example of, like I said, people are upset, and I put it to my father this way, who was angry about it and thought he was a traitor, and whatever. He had his opinions about it, and I said, if it was me, and you're my dad, and it doesn't look like my draft stock's good, I have a rift with Georgia. The fan base is kind of done with me, and I just got offered $4 or $5 million to go to Miami and play one more year and give it one more shot, have a fresh start, have my significant other there. Would you really say, hey Ryan, don't go? What would you say? Like, he's got to go do that. I just, how can you be upset with someone about that decision? That's kind of my perspective on that. But it's an example of, hey, if they wanted to keep him, they needed to offer him a lot of money, right? And Kirby and Georgia doesn't want to, I think, get rid of some of those values when it comes to getting these players, and I respect the hell out of that. My question is, do they need to let that go sometimes? So let me know what you think in the comments down below. Newsletter is in the description down below. Thank you for watching.